Ma'am, that line is for our premier passengers. Coach boarding hasn't begun. The words, slick with a practiced condescension, slid through the noisy hum of the Atlanta airport. They were aimed at Dr. Alani Kestrel. She stood patiently in the nearly empty priority lane, the soft glow of the gate's overhead sign illuminating the Munich destination. She was dressed for a 14-hour journey that would end not with a vacation, but with a grueling 20-hour work session. Her clothes were a testament to function over form: charcoal grey joggers made of a technical fabric that wouldn't wrinkle, a simple black long-sleeved shirt, and a pair of cushioned sneakers that had cost more than the man speaking to her likely made in a day. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, intricate braid that fell to the middle of her back. She looked young, perhaps 28 or 29, and held her phone in one hand, the boarding pass a bright QR code on its screen. The man who had spoken was Barry Vance. He was 52, with a soft paunch that strained the buttons of his navy blue airline uniform and a face that seemed permanently soured, as if he'd just bitten into a lemon. For 2 decades, Gate F-14 had been his kingdom, a tiny fiefdom where his word was law. He saw himself not as a customer service agent, but as a guardian, a sentinel protecting the sanctity of the front cabin from the unwashed masses of the back. He had a sixth sense, he believed, for people who didn't belong. And this young woman, with her casual clothes and her quiet demeanor, set off every alarm in his prejudiced mind. Alani blinked slowly, turning to face him. "I know," she said, her voice calm and even. "I'm in Group 1. Barry offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He leaned over his podium, a king looking down from his throne. He let his eyes travel from her sneakers up to her face, a deliberate, dismissive inventory. "Miss," he said, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried farther than a shout, "the Premier Global line is for first-class and executive platinum members. I see this all the time. People get confused. The general boarding area is just behind the stanchions." He gestured vaguely with a thumb. "You're holding up my premier passengers." The line consisted of one other person, a man in a rumpled suit who was now looking pointedly at his phone, trying to pretend he wasn't witnessing the exchange. "I'm not confused," Alani replied, a flicker of weariness in her eyes. She extended her phone. "My seat is 2A, if you'll just scan the pass." "I don't need to scan it to know it's going to reject," Barry shot back, his confidence swelling. He was on familiar ground now, the righteous enforcer of rules. "Look, I get it. You want to get on early, find a spot for your carry-on. But there's a system for a reason. Now please step aside." He raised his voice, performing for the other agent at the adjacent gate. "Sir, you can come on through," he called to the man in the rumpled suit. The man hesitated, looking from Barry to Alani, clearly uncomfortable. Alani didn't move. She wasn't a large woman, but she had a stillness about her, an anchor of resolve that seemed to make her immovable. The air around the podium grew thick with tension. "My name is Dr. Kestrel," she said, her voice losing its gentle edge and taking on the precision of cut glass. "I am booked in seat 2A on this flight. You have 2 options. You can scan my boarding pass, or you can call your supervisor. The choice is yours, but I am not moving from this line." A blotchy red flush crept up Barry's neck. He hated being challenged. He hated it more when the challenge came from someone he had already categorized and dismissed. It was a violation of the natural order of his world. He let out a theatrical sigh, shaking his head for the benefit of his imaginary audience. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you one final time to step away from the podium. You are interfering with the boarding process, which is a federal offense, in case you didn't know." "The only person interfering with the boarding process is you," Alani countered, her voice dangerously quiet. "Scan the ticket." "Fine," Barry snapped, his composure cracking. He snatched the heavy scanner gun from its cradle as if it were a weapon. "But when this thing flashes red and that alarm goes off, don't say I didn't warn you. You'll be at the back of the general boarding line, if you're lucky." He aimed the red laser at her phone's screen with a flourish of aggression. A clear, cheerful chime echoed in the gate area. Beep. The light on the automated gate beside the podium flashed a brilliant, undeniable green. On Barry's monitor, in large white letters, were the words Kestrel, A and 2A, Premier Global. Silence. The hum of the terminal's ventilation system seemed to roar into the sudden vacuum. The man in the rumpled suit cleared his throat. Barry stared at his screen, his mouth slightly agape. It was a mistake, a system glitch, it had to be. Maybe she'd hacked the app. He'd read about things like that. "Computer's been acting up," he mumbled, tapping a few keys to reset his screen. That scan didn't register properly. "It registered a green light," Alani stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm boarding." She took a step toward the open gate. In a move that shocked everyone, Barry physically moved from behind the podium, using his own body to block the narrow entrance to the jet bridge. "I said, hold on," he barked, all pretense of customer service now vaporized. "Nobody gets on my flight until I say so. I need to verify this manually. Let me see your identification and the credit card you used to purchase this ticket." A low grumble started among the handful of other first-class passengers who had now lined up. "For God's sake, it scanned green," a woman with a leather briefcase muttered. "Let her go." Barry's face was slick with sweat. He was in too deep to back down. If he admitted he was wrong now, he would lose face. He would look like a fool. And Barry Vance, in his small kingdom of Gate F-14, was never the fool. He had to be right. She had to be the fraud. Alani looked at the man blocking her path, this furious, petty bureaucrat. She took a slow, deep breath. From her carry-on, a simple but clearly expensive leather backpack, she retrieved a slim wallet. She handed him her driver's license. He snatched it. "Dr. Alani Kestrel," he read, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A doctor, are we? What kind of doctor wears sweatpants to an international flight?" "The kind who designed the avionics suite of the aircraft we're about to fly on," she said, her patience worn to a microscopic thread. Barry let out a short, barking laugh. "Right, and I'm the chief pilot. Now the credit card." She handed him a sleek, heavy black card made of matte metal. The name on the card was simple, Kestrel Aviation. He squinted at it. Never heard of it. Probably one of those online fake companies. He turned to his terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard, searching for a flaw, a crack, any justification for his stand. He found one. "Aha," he said, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Ticket was purchased less than 12 hours ago. A one-way first-class international ticket. Bought with a corporate card. That's a classic red flag for fraud. It fits the profile perfectly." "What profile is that exactly?" Alani asked, her voice dangerously soft. "The profile of someone using stolen corporate card numbers to book last-minute, high-value travel before the real cardholder can report it," Barry declared, his voice rising again. He felt his power returning. He had found his justification. "I cannot, under federal regulations, allow you to board until we can verify with the cardholder that this charge is legitimate." "I am the cardholder," Alani said, her gaze unwavering. "It's my company." "Sure it is, sweetheart," Barry sneered. "And I own the airline. Look, Dr. Kestrel, or whoever you are, I'm going to have to ask you to step over to those seats." He pointed to a row of hard plastic chairs. "I'm calling airport security to sort this out." "You're calling security on a paying passenger with a valid confirmed ticket." "I'm calling security on a suspected fraud who is disrupting the boarding of this aircraft," Barry shouted. He felt the eyes of the terminal on him and believed they saw a hero, a man holding the line against disorder. Alani didn't move toward the chairs. Instead, her gaze drifted past him through the massive plate glass window to the aircraft waiting on the tarmac. It was a magnificent machine, a new Kestrel K-787, its wings swept back like a bird of prey, its fuselage gleaming under the afternoon sun. She noticed the ground power unit cable was connected at a slight, inefficient angle, probably putting a minor strain on the port connector. It was a tiny detail, a flaw in an otherwise perfect picture, and it bothered her. "Barry," she said, bringing her focus back to the fuming man in front of her. Her use of his first name, which she'd read from his name tag, seemed to startle him. "I strongly advise you to get your station manager down here right now, before you turn a simple customer service failure into a career-ending incident." The threat was the last straw. Barry's face contorted with rage. "That's it? You're done." He picked up the landline phone on his desk and jabbed in a 3-digit number. "Yeah, this is Vance at F-14. I need Port Authority down here. I have a belligerent passenger refusing to comply with instructions. Possible ticket fraud. Yes, hostile. He slammed the phone down and crossed his arms over his chest, a smug look of finality on his face. They're on their way. You wanted to make a scene. Well, you got one. The boarding line had come to a complete standstill. Anxious murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Barry had single-handedly halted the departure of a transatlantic flight. Alani simply sighed. She took out her phone again, ignoring Barry's command to put that away. She navigated to her contacts and pressed a number saved under K1787MUN cockpit. "Who are you calling now?" Barry demanded. "Your lawyer? It's too late for that. I'm calling the one person on this side of the Atlantic who can verify my identity for you," Alani said as the phone connected. It wasn't a normal call, it was a direct satellite link, bypassing the cellular network entirely. "Hello? Yes, Marcus, it's Alani. I'm at the gate, F14. Yes, the agent is uncooperative. He believes I've stolen my own credit card. No, I'm not kidding. Can you come up? You're in the middle of pre-flight." "Understood. Just tell me, did the diagnostics I uploaded this morning show any phase imbalance on the GPU feed?" "It did." "Okay, that's what I thought. Thanks." She ended the call. Barry laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Who was that, your pilot boyfriend? You think name-dropping is going to get you out of this? Lady, you are digging yourself a hole so deep." He was cut off by the arrival of 2 Port Authority police officers. They moved with a weary stride that suggested this was not the first gate agent drama they'd been called to that day. "What's the problem here?" the older of the 2 officers asked, his hand resting on his belt. "Officer, thank goodness," Barry said, shifting into the role of a beleaguered public servant. "This woman here is attempting to board with a fraudulent ticket. It's a last-minute purchase on a suspicious corporate card. When I tried to verify it, she became hostile and is refusing to cooperate. She's holding up the entire flight." The officer turned his tired eyes to Alani. "Ma'am, is that true?" "I have a valid, paid-for ticket for seat 2A, Alani said calmly. He scanned it. It turned green. He then decided, based on my appearance, that I couldn't possibly afford it and has accused me of fraud. "I never said she couldn't afford it," Barry lied, his voice shrill. "I said the transaction was flagged by the system." "Flagged by what system?" the officer asked, turning back to Barry. The scanner turned green. "Did your console show a fraud alert, or did you just decide it was fraudulent?" I used my discretion," Barry stammered, cornered. "It fit a known profile." "A profile," Alani repeated, the words hanging in the air like an indictment. "Ma'am, I need to see your ID," the officer said, his tone professional but firm. Alani gestured to Barry. "He has it. He refuses to give it back." The officer held out his hand. "Give me the ID, son." Reluctantly, Barry handed over Alani's license. The officer studied it, then looked at Alani, then back at the license. "Dr. Kestrel, and the ticket is for 2A. He looked at Barry. "The scan was green. I'm not seeing the probable cause for a police response here, Mr. Vance." "It's her behavior," Barry insisted, grasping at straws. "She's arrogant, and she just pretended to call the pilot. She's making up stories to intimidate me." As if on cue, the secure door leading from the jet bridge to the gate area swung open with a pneumatic hiss. A gust of conditioned air washed over them. Standing in the doorway was a man who commanded instant authority. He was tall, with silvering hair at his temples and a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite. The 4 gold stripes on his uniform's epaulettes identified him as the aircraft's captain. His expression was one of controlled fury. Barry's jaw went slack. "Captain Thorne, we have a situation here. I was just handling it." Captain Marcus Thorne's eyes swept past Barry as if he were a piece of furniture. He walked past the police officers and stopped directly in front of Alani. To the astonishment of the entire gate area, he didn't ask for her ticket. He didn't demand an explanation. He inclined his head in a gesture of profound respect. "Dr. Kestrel," Captain Thorne said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the terminal's noise. "I am so sorry for this. We were just about to call you. The GPU is indeed showing a phase imbalance, just like you predicted. The ground crew is swapping it now. I don't know what I'd do without your remote diagnostics." Barry felt the floor drop out from under him. Remote diagnostics? Alani offered the captain a small, weary smile. It's fine, Marcus. It seems your gate agent here, Barry, thinks I'm a credit card thief. Captain Thorne turned his head slowly, his gaze finally landing on Barry. The look in his eyes could have frozen molten steel. You think, he began, his voice dangerously low. You think the woman who holds the patents on this aircraft's wing design stole a credit card to get on board? The silence that descended was absolute. The background chatter of the terminal, the distant boarding calls, the rolling of suitcases, it all seemed to vanish. Every eye was on the drama unfolding at gate F-14. The owner, Barry squeaked, the word barely audible. Barry, Alani said, her voice now as smooth and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. You said you'd never heard of my company, Kestrel Aviation. That's understandable. We're more of an industry name, but you work for this airline. You stand at this gate every day. Have you ever bothered to look at the name painted on the fuselage of the K-787s? She pointed a single steady finger out the window at the gleaming white plane. Go ahead. Look, right under the cockpit window. With trembling legs, Barry turned and looked. There, in elegant, swooping silver letters, were two words that sealed his fate. Kestrel Aviation. And just below it, the aircraft's individual name. The Alani. He turned back around, his face the color of ash. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. He was a fish, stranded on the dock, gasping in an alien atmosphere of his own making. The older police officer, Officer Miller, let out a long, slow whistle. He took a respectful step away from Alani, as if her personal space had suddenly acquired a new and powerful gravity. He looked at Barry with an expression that was equal parts pity and disgust. Son, he said, his voice loud enough for the first few rows of onlookers to hear clearly. You called the Port Authority police for a boarding dispute with the woman the plane is named after. The spell of silence was broken by a new sound, a sound that would haunt Barry Vance's nightmares for the rest of his life. The collective, unmistakable click and whir of dozens of smartphones being raised, their cameras activated. The tired, annoyed crowd of travelers had become an audience. They had sensed the seismic shift in power. They had seen the captain's deference. They had heard the officer's summary. The villain of the story had just been unmasked. I didn't know, Barry finally managed to cry out, his voice a panicked squeak. The defensive walls of his ego were crumbling into dust. How was I supposed to know? She's wearing joggers. She doesn't look like what, Barry? Alani's voice sliced through his pathetic defense. What does an engineer look like? What does a CEO look like? Do they have a uniform I'm not aware of? Every time you open your mouth, you are digging your hole deeper. I suggest you stop talking. Immediately. A passenger in the back of the line, a man in a bright Hawaiian shirt, yelled out, Hey buddy, you gonna let the lady on her plane or not? Some of us have connections to make. A ripple of derisive laughter spread through the crowd. Captain Thorne stepped forward, his tall frame completely eclipsing the now cowering gate agent. Vance, you are delaying the departure of an international flight. You are harassing the airline's most important partner. And you are illegally holding her identification. Give her back her license, now. Barry's hand shook so violently he could barely release the card. Alani took it without a word and slipped it back into her wallet. Officers, she said, turning to the police, am I free to board my plane now, or do you still need to investigate me for the crime of buying a ticket while black? Ma'am, you are free to go, Officer Miller said, touching the brim of his cap. And on behalf of the Port Authority, I apologize. We were clearly given false information by airline staff. Thank you, officer. Alani turned for a final look at Barry. She leaned in close, her voice a low, confidential whisper that only he and Captain Thorne could hear. I'm going to board my aircraft. You are going to finish boarding this flight with a smile on your face. You will be polite to every single person who comes through here. And when I land in Munich, I will be having a conversation with the chairman of this airline. His name is Arthur. We sit on a National Transportation Safety Board together. While I'm in the air, you should probably spend the time updating your resume. She turned without a backward glance and walked through the gate. Captain Thorne fixed Barry with one last withering glare. a look that communicated more contempt than 1,000 words ever could, and followed her down the jet bridge. Barry was left alone at his podium, a solitary figure in the wreckage of his own authority. The adrenaline that had fueled his righteous crusade had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, nauseating dread. He looked up at the line of passengers, all of them staring at him, their faces a mixture of amusement, anger, and scorn. The man in the rumpled suit finally stepped forward. He placed his phone on the scanner. "So," he said, his voice dripping with irony, "am I cleared for takeoff, or do you need to check my credit score first?" Barry swallowed, the sound loud in his own ears. His hands were trembling. Boarding Group 1, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "We can't hear you," someone shouted from the back. "Boarding Group 1, Barry shrieked, his voice cracking on the verge of hysteria. He scanned the man's ticket. Beep. Green. He couldn't meet the man's eyes. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes. He worked on autopilot, a robot performing a task, the jeers and mocking comments of the passengers washing over him. He could feel the stares of his colleagues. They knew. The entire airport would know by the end of the day. He had tried to ground the woman who owned the sky. But even as the shame burned in his gut, a darker, more venomous feeling began to take root, a twisted, malignant sprout of rage. She did this to me, he thought, the narrative already shifting in his mind. She set me up, coming here dressed like a college kid. She wanted this to happen. She wanted to humiliate me. He wasn't sorry, he was furious, and he wasn't powerless yet. Not completely. The flight manifest was still on his screen. The plane door wasn't closed. He still had one last move he could make. The moment Alani stepped from the functional chaos of the jet bridge into the cabin of the K-787, the world changed. The air was cool and crisp, with a faint, clean scent that was the result of a proprietary filtration system she had helped design. The cabin lighting was a soft, shifting sky blue, calibrated to ease passengers into a new time zone. This wasn't just an airplane, it was her life's work. "Dr. Kestrel, welcome aboard," the lead flight attendant, a woman named Ingrid, with a warm, professional smile, greeted her. "We're honored to have you with us." Ingrid had flown on Kestrel test flights and recognized Alani immediately. She took Alani's backpack with a practiced efficiency. "Good to see you, Ingrid," Alani said, the tension finally beginning to recede from her shoulders. "Sorry about the drama at the gate. We had a staffing issue." "We heard," Ingrid said, her voice dropping as she led Alani to her seat, a spacious private suite at the front of the cabin. "Captain Thorne radioed ahead. He said the gate agent accused you of fraud. It's unbelievable." "He tried to have me arrested," Alani corrected her, sinking into the plush leather of seat 2A. She knew every detail of this suite, from the thread count of the linen to the precise torque of the motors that controlled the lie-flat bed. She had signed off on all of it. She accepted a glass of chilled water and gazed out the window. She could see the ground crew, having successfully swapped the power unit, giving a thumbs up to the cockpit. She was on this flight for a reason. The airline's entire fleet of new K-787s was due for a critical firmware update to their flight management system. The update could be done remotely, but the initial master push to the first aircraft in the European fleet had to be monitored in person to ensure there were no integration conflicts with the local air traffic control networks in Munich. It was a delicate, high-stakes operation. Grounding the fleet to do it would cost the airline tens of millions. Her being on this flight, monitoring the data stream in real time, was saving them a fortune. And Barry Vance, in his infinite wisdom, had almost scuttled the entire mission over a pair of joggers. Captain Thorne's voice came over the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 212, with service to Munich. We apologize for the slight departure delay. We were dealing with a ground staff issue that has now been resolved. We're fortunate to have a very special guest with us today, Dr. Alani Kestrel, the chief designer of this K-787 aircraft, so I can assure you, you are in the best possible hands. Our flight time tonight will be—" Alani smiled. Marcus was a good man. But as his announcement finished, the plane remained stationary. The jet bridge was still attached. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The gentle hum of the auxiliary power unit was the only sound. A sense of unease began to ripple through the cabin. Once the doors were closed, pushback was supposed to be immediate. Alani pressed the call button. Ingrid appeared in an instant. "What's the hold-up?" Alani asked. "We're going to miss our departure slot." Ingrid's professional smile was strained. "It's the gate agent, Dr. Kestrel. He hasn't transmitted the final sign-off. He's claiming there's a last-minute discrepancy between the checked baggage count and the passenger manifest." Alani's eyes narrowed. "Barry." "Yes," Ingrid confirmed. "He's insisting on a manual recount of the electronic baggage tags against the manifest before he'll release the flight. Captain Thorne is arguing with him over the radio, but the agent is citing federal security protocol. He says he has reason to believe a bag was loaded for a passenger who did not board." Alani unbuckled her seatbelt. "He's lying. He's doing this to punish me, to punish all of us. Dr. Kestrel, please remain seated." "I'm not getting off, Ingrid. I'm going to the cockpit." She strode to the front of the plane. The cockpit door was open. Captain Thorne had his headset half off his head and was rubbing his temples. His first officer, a younger man, was staring grimly at a console. "Marcus," Alani said from the doorway. "What is he doing?" Thorne threw his hands up in exasperation. "He's got us, Alani. He's filed a Z-14 security flag. It's a minor procedural form, but it requires a ground supervisor's signature to override. He knows the terminal manager is on the other side of the airport in a meeting. He's burying us in red tape. If we don't push back in the next 5 minutes, we lose our slot in the departure queue. We'll be stuck on the tarmac for at least 90 minutes. "He knows that," Alani said, her mind working quickly. "He's burning company money to soothe his bruised ego." She looked at the complex array of instruments, her eyes falling on the communications panel. "Marcus, patch me through to the gate's ground channel." "Alani, I can't let a passenger speak on an active aviation channel." "I'm not a passenger," she reminded him, her voice firm. "I am the lessor of this aircraft. My company's name is on the registration, and until this plane is under its own power, I have every right to speak to ground staff regarding the operational safety and security of my asset. Now give me the headset." A slow grin spread across Captain Thorne's face. He recognized the tone in her voice. It was the same tone she used when she was telling a team of senior engineers they had miscalculated the stress tolerance on a wing spar. He handed her his headset. Alani settled the device over her ears, the microphone curving in front of her lips. She pressed the transmit button. "Gate F-14, this is Kestrel 787. Do you copy?" There was a burst of static, then Barry's voice, thick with a feigned officious professionalism. "Aircraft, this is gate control. We are still resolving a baggage security conflict. Maintain your position at the gate." "Barry," Alani said, her voice calm and clear over the radio. "This is Dr. Kestrel. Let's stop playing games." A dead silence on the other end. "I know precisely what you are doing," she continued, her voice as cold and precise as the digital readouts in front of her. "You believe you are exercising some final pathetic shred of authority. You think you are inconveniencing me. Here is what you are actually doing. The live data link from this aircraft is active. I can see that for every minute we sit here idling, the APU is consuming approximately 12 gallons of jet fuel. That's a quantifiable cost that is logged under the delay code you've entered. Ground staff discretion. That cost is billed directly against your station's quarterly operational budget." She paused, letting the information sink in. "Furthermore," she went on, "missing our departure slot means we will also miss our assigned oceanic entry point. That will require air traffic control in Gander to reroute us, which carries a fine. It also means we will land late in Munich, causing at least 37 passengers on this flight to miss their connections. The cost of rebooking those passengers, plus providing hotel and meal vouchers, will also be logged against the F-14 delay incident report." "Your incident report." She took a breath, the recycled air of the cockpit suddenly feeling thin and sharp in her lungs. "By the time this plane lands, your little temper tantrum will have cost this airline somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000. And when the investigation is open tomorrow, and believe me, it will be, they won't just see an employee who made a mistake. They will see an employee who willfully and maliciously sabotaged a flight out of personal spite. They won't just fire you, Barry. The airline's legal department will sue you in civil court to reclaim those losses. They will garnish your wages for the rest of your life. You will lose your pension. You will lose everything. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a chasm, filled with the weight of a life about to be irrevocably altered. On the other end of the line, there was only the faint, pathetic crackle of static. The sound of a man's entire world being compressed into a single crushing point of pressure. Thorne and his first officer were no longer just watching. They were bearing witness, their expressions a stark blend of awe and a primal fear of the power being wielded. You have 10 seconds to transmit the final load sheet and release this aircraft, Alani concluded, her voice now devoid of heat, as sterile and final as a coroner's report. Make a smart choice, Barry. It might be the last one you get to make. The seconds stretched into an eternity. 1, 2. The hum of the avionics seemed to grow louder. 3, 4, 5. A bead of sweat traced a path down the first officer's temple. 6, 7. A sudden jarring whir broke the tension. The small thermal printer on the central console shuddered to life, spitting out a long ribbon of paper. The finalized weight and balance report. The flight's official birth certificate. It was an admission of unconditional surrender. A moment later, a voice slithered through the headset, a ghost of the one that had been so full of blustering authority just minutes before. It was small, broken, and hollowed out from the inside. Paperwork. Transmitted. Kestrel 787, you are cleared for pushback. Good choice, Alani said softly. The words meant more for herself than for him. She removed the headset, the weight of it a tangible symbol of the burden she'd just been forced to carry, and handed it back to a wide-eyed Captain Thorne. Let's fly, Marcus. As she walked back to her suite, the aircraft gave a gentle, powerful lurch, the first tremor of its release from the terminal's grip. She settled into the familiar contours of Seat 2A and buckled the belt, the simple click of the mechanism a sound of finality. Outside the triple-paned window, the concrete and glass monolith of the terminal began to slide away, a slow, inexorable divorce. For a fleeting instant, the window of gate F-14 came into view. A lone figure was silhouetted against the artificial brightness within, a man made small by distance and circumstance, watching his world, his kingdom, pull away from him. He had lost. Alani felt no triumph, only a profound and weary emptiness. The battle was won, but the war against the Barry Vances of the world, she knew, was endless. The K-787, her K-787, climbed with a steep, muscular grace, piercing the bruised twilight over Georgia. The city lights below fractured into a glittering, abstract mosaic before being swallowed by a blanket of clouds. Alani opened her laptop, the familiar glow of the screen a small comfort in the darkened cabin. The firmware update required her full attention, a complex symphony of data streams and diagnostic protocols that she normally found immersive, almost meditative. But tonight her focus fractured. Her mind kept replaying the scene at the gate, the sneer on his face, the casual dismissive wave of his hand. What kind of doctor wears sweatpants? It wasn't the accusation of fraud that stung, it was the utter certainty with which he had judged her, the smug conviction that his narrow view of the world was the only one that mattered. It reminded her of her father, a brilliant electrical engineer with a mind like a diamond, who spent his entire career being called chief by junior colleagues who couldn't be bothered to learn his name. He'd come home every night, his worn leather briefcase filled with elegant, hand-drawn schematics they would praise in meetings and then claim as their own. He had taught her to build things, but also to build walls of excellence and irrefutable competence that no one could tear down. Yet here she was, CEO of her own aviation company, her name literally on the side of the plane, and a man like Barry Vance could still try to deny her entry. The walls, it seemed, could never be high enough. The flight was a long, quiet passage through the dark. Somewhere over the vast ink-black expanse of the Atlantic, as the northern lights painted ethereal green curtains on the edge of space, she initiated the firmware upload. Her team in Munich, a hand-picked group of the brightest engineers she knew, were on a secure channel, monitoring the data packets as they streamed from the aircraft to the airline's European servers. It was a delicate digital transplant, and it went off without a hitch. The system rebooted, the new code settling into the aircraft's digital nervous system like a native language. A job well done, a problem solved. That, at least, was a comfort she could hold on to. As the plane began its descent, the first blush of dawn was breaking over the Bavarian countryside. The landscape below was a patchwork of frost-dusted fields and dark, sleeping forests, a world of order and calm. The landing was flawless, a gentle kiss of rubber on tarmac that Marcus Thorne executed with the finesse of a concert pianist. She felt the familiar quiet pride swell in her chest. This magnificent machine, this synthesis of a million perfect parts, worked. It flew. It was real. She was one of the first to deplane, thanking Ingrid and the crew. She stepped onto the jet bridge, breathing in the cool, crisp German air, a welcome antidote to the lingering stress of Atlanta. She expected to see a car service sign with her name on it. Instead, she saw two men in the stern, forest green uniforms and flat-topped caps of the Bundespolizei, the German federal police. They stood with a stillness that was both professional and deeply unsettling, their presence a stark anomaly in the mundane flow of disembarking passengers. The senior officer, a man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much, stepped forward. "Dr. Alani Kestrel?" he asked. His German accent was thick, but his English was precise, each word a carefully placed stone. "Yes?" The knot of weariness in her stomach instantly tightened into a cold ball of dread. This was wrong. "We have received an official notification from an international partner agency," he said, his tone flat and official. "It alleges that you may be transporting sensitive, unlicensed aerospace technology and proprietary corporate data in violation of international trade and intellectual property agreements. Please come with us. We are required to inspect your personal effects, luggage, and all electronic devices." The accusation was a thunderclap in the quiet jet bridge. It was absurd, baseless, and utterly diabolically brilliant. It wasn't a clumsy accusation of theft. It was a sophisticated charge of corporate espionage, a dagger aimed at the very heart of her professional identity. An anonymous tip, untraceable, unverifiable, but in a high-tech, high-security country like Germany, it was an allegation that had to be pursued with the utmost seriousness. It didn't have to be true, it only had to be investigated. And the investigation itself was the punishment. Barry. The name echoed in the chambers of her mind. This was his parting shot, the desperate, venomous act of a man with nothing left to lose, a scorpion stinging from beneath the boot that was crushing him. He couldn't stop her from flying, so he had found a way to cage her on the ground. For the next 4 hours, Alani existed in a grey, sterile purgatory. The room was windowless, lit by humming fluorescent tubes that cast no shadows. It smelled of disinfectant and faint despair. Her laptop, her phone, her encrypted work drives, her entire professional life were laid out on a steel table. A technician in latex gloves methodically photographed each item before connecting them to a formidable-looking forensic analysis machine. They took her backpack, unpacking her clothes, her toiletries, her personal notebook with a detached clinical thoroughness that felt more violating than any physical search. A different official, a grim-faced man from customs with eyes like grey pebbles, questioned her. He was not aggressive, but his persistence was a form of psychological erosion. "What is the precise nature of the firmware update you performed in flight, Dr. Kestrel? Who owns the intellectual property for the avionics source code? Can you explain this encrypted container on your primary drive? Who has the decryption key? Your company, Kestrel Aviation, who are the primary shareholders?" She answered every question with the same calm, measured precision she would use in a technical briefing. She explained the nature of her work, the legal agreements with the airline, the security protocols she herself had designed to protect the very data they were accusing her of stealing. But inside, a glacial rage was forming. They were poring over her schematics, her lines of code, the digital blueprints of her soul, and they understood none of it. To them, it was just suspicious data. To her, it was art. It was her life's work, and they were treating it like contraband. This was Barry's true victory, not just to inconvenience her, but to have her brilliance mistaken for criminality, to have her competence itself used as evidence against her. Finally, after a flurry of frantic, high-level calls between Kestrel Aviation's European legal team, the US Embassy in Berlin, and the German Ministry of the Interior, the senior police officer returned. He looked exhausted. He walked to the steel table and carefully placed her laptop and phone back in front of her. His professional mask had slipped, revealing a deep human weariness. "Dr. Kestrel," he said, and the formality was now tinged with apology. "It appears the intelligence we received was fraudulent, a malicious fabrication with no basis in fact. We have traced the originating call. It came from a public, untraceable payphone at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, placed approximately 30 minutes after your flight's departure." He sighed, a sound of profound bureaucratic regret. "On behalf of the Federal Republic of Germany, I offer our deepest apologies for this inconvenience." Alani slowly reached for her laptop, the cool metal a familiar comfort beneath her fingers. She looked up at the officer, and the light in her eyes was no longer weary. It was hard, bright, and sharp enough to cut glass. "The inconvenience is not your fault, officer," she said, her voice steady and low. "It is the fault of the man who made that call. And I assure you, he is about to discover the difference between a temporary inconvenience and a permanent consequence." She walked out of the sterile confines of the security wing and into the bright, soaring atrium of the Munich airport. She didn't go to her hotel to rest. The need for sleep had been incinerated by the cold fire of her anger. A waiting car took her directly to Kestrel Aviation's German headquarters, a sleek building of glass and steel on the outskirts of the city. There, in a secure telepresence suite that she had designed for exactly this kind of crisis, she initiated a conference call. On the screen, the face of Arthur Redding, the silver-haired chairman of Transatlantic Airways, appeared, along with the grim visages of the airline's entire executive legal team. They looked concerned. They had been briefed. They had no idea what was coming. "Arthur," Alani began, her voice a calm, level instrument of destruction. "Let's be perfectly clear about what has happened. Your employee, Barry Vance, did not merely harass a passenger. He did not simply delay a flight. He has now weaponized international law enforcement by filing a false police report across national borders. In legal terms, this act could be construed as an attempt at industrial sabotage, even corporate terrorism. This is no longer a human resources issue that can be solved with a pink slip and a union grievance. This is a federal and international criminal matter." She let that sink in. She could see the blood drain from Arthur's face. "I am not just your partner, Arthur. I am your creditor. You fly my planes. The financing agreements that underwrite your entire K-787 fleet are with my company. And those agreements contain a standard security and cooperation clause, which your employee has flagrantly violated, exposing my company and my person to significant risk. This is a material breach of our contract." She paused. "So here is what is going to happen. Your legal team is going to cooperate fully with the FBI, to whom my lawyers are reporting this crime as we speak. You will hand over every piece of evidence you have: security footage, employment records, witness statements. You will not protect him. You will not hide him. You will deliver him. In return, I will not activate the breach of contract penalties, which, as your lawyers can confirm, would allow me to ground your entire transatlantic fleet, effective immediately." It was not a request. It was a statement of terms. The airline executives on the screen looked as if they had been struck by lightning. 2 days later, Barry Vance whistled as he walked from the employee parking lot toward the terminal. He felt good, vindicated. He hadn't heard a peep, which could only mean his anonymous tip had worked its magic. He pictured Dr. High and Mighty Kestrel in some cold German cell, being strip-searched, her fancy laptop taken apart piece by piece. The image was so satisfying it made him smile. He was still Barry Vance, king of Gate F-14. He'd shown her. You don't mess with the system. You don't mess with him. He reached the employee security checkpoint, a place where he'd swiped his badge 10,000 times. He held the plastic card to the reader with a familiar lazy flick of the wrist. Instead of the permissive green light and cheerful chirp, a harsh, grating buzzer sounded. A blood-red light flashed above the reader. The screen displayed 2 words in stark block letters: "Access denied." Barry frowned. Glitch. He swiped it again, harder this time. Buzz, access denied. Problem with your badge, Barry? Asked the security guard, a young man named Carl whom Barry had always treated with disdain. Carl's face was a mask of perfect neutrality. Yeah, things busted. Just buzz me through, will ya? Barry said with a dismissive wave. Carl looked down at a printed memo on his desk, then back up at Barry. Can't do that, Barry. Says here your security clearance has been permanently revoked, effective immediately. You're instructed to report to the main airline administration building. They're waiting for you. The walk across the sky bridge to the admin building felt like a mile. The air suddenly seemed too thin to breathe. It's just a suspension, he told himself, his heart hammering against his ribs. They have to investigate. The union will protect me. They have to. He was escorted not to an HR office, but to the main executive conference room, a place he had only ever seen in corporate videos. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting. On one side sat the airline's head of HR, its chief legal counsel, and the Atlanta station manager, all of them wearing expressions of grim finality. On the other side of the table, sitting next to a man in a severe dark suit who could only be a lawyer, were two people who were unmistakably FBI agents. They didn't look like they were there to investigate, they looked like they were there to collect. Mr. Vance, the chief counsel began, his voice as cold as a tombstone. He slid a thick folder across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Barry. This is your termination paperwork, but frankly, that is the very least of your concerns today. He gestured to the two agents. These gentlemen are here to discuss a phone call you made from a payphone in Concourse E 2 days ago to the German authorities regarding Dr. Alani Kestrel. As it turns out, filing a false report that triggers a multi-agency international law enforcement response is a federal crime under the Patriot Act. So is conspiracy to commit industrial sabotage. Barry's world didn't just collapse, it ceased to exist. The air rushed from his lungs, the smug satisfaction, the vengeful rage, the lifetime of petty grievances, all of it evaporated, replaced by a pure, crystalline terror that was so absolute it was almost peaceful. He looked at the hard, unyielding faces around the table and saw not a jury, but an abyss. 6 months later, the gears of justice had ground to their inevitable conclusion. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, satellite phone logs, airport security footage, a detailed forensic analysis of the payphone, and the prospect of a decade or more in federal prison, Barry Vance pleaded guilty. He lost his job. He lost his pension. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation and ordered to pay a crippling fine to the airline for the damages, an amount so vast it was purely symbolic, a debt he would carry to his grave. And in a final exquisite stroke of irony, his name was permanently added to the federal no-fly list. The man who had spent 20 years guarding a gate could now never pass through one again. Nearly a year after the incident, the grand ballroom of a Washington, D.C. hotel was filled to capacity. Alani stood at the podium, a single spotlight illuminating her against the dark stage. She was the keynote speaker at the annual Women in Aerospace Gala, a picture of poise and power. We face barriers in this industry, she said, her voice clear and resonant, carrying to every corner of the vast room. Some are technical, the laws of physics are stubborn things. Some are financial, but some, the most insidious, are the barriers of perception. The invisible gates. The assumptions people make about you, about your capabilities, about whether you belong based on what you look like, or where you come from, or yes, even how you dress. A thoughtful, almost distant look came into her eyes. Last year I had an experience at one of those gates. It was ugly, it was infuriating. And for a few hours in a small, windowless room, it made me feel powerless. It was a reminder that no matter how high you fly, there will always be someone on the ground who thinks you have no right to be in the sky. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the rapt audience. But that feeling passed, and it was replaced by something else. A resolve, a realization that it's not enough to simply fly over the gates. It's not enough to prove the gatekeepers wrong. You have to dismantle the gates themselves. On the giant screen behind her, a new logo materialized, a stylized K for Kestrel that also formed an open, welcoming gateway. Tonight, she announced, her voice ringing with a passion that went far beyond corporate philanthropy, I am thrilled to launch the Kestrel Gateway Initiative. It is a multi-million-dollar scholarship and mentorship program. But it is more than that. It is a promise. It is a commitment to find the brilliant minds in overlooked places, to support the young women and men who don't fit the traditional profile, and to give them the resources they need, not just to enter this industry, but to lead it. It is founded on a simple, unshakable principle. Talent does not have a dress code. Brilliance does not have a zip code. And the only thing that should ever determine how high you can fly is the power of your ideas and the strength of your character. A wave of thunderous applause rose from the audience, a sustained roar of approval and emotion. Alani smiled, but it was not a smile of victory over one small, bitter man in Atlanta. It was the quiet, profound smile of an engineer who had found a structural flaw in the world and had decided, with all the formidable force of her intellect and will, to fix it. She hadn't just opened the gate for herself. She had drawn up the blueprints for 1,000 new ones and was handing the keys to anyone with the courage to fly.